By the time I got home that afternoon, I got a call from a senior officer and said, "Have you heard what's happened at the airport?"
Shocked passengers fled in fear when violence erupted at Sydney Airport in March 2009.
That was a turning point in the way that the police policed bikies. I'm Gary Jubelin, and sitting opposite me is Stephen Drill. Stephen's hosting a new podcast called Bikies Inc. So, Stephen, interesting subject.
Well, I started digging into this about 8 or 9 months ago. It was just before Christmas and did the first few interviews and thought, bikies obviously are an interesting topic. And then the whole world went crazy. We've had people getting shot outside gyms. We've had people getting shot at funerals, for goodness sake. It's become one of the more hot topics.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing it. And as an ex-police officer who happened to worked in Gang Squad as a detective at Gang Squad, but yeah, there seems to be a fascination by the world of bikies at the moment.
Well, it's a fascination, but it's not something that's new. We've had bikies for probably 50 years in Australia. I mean, Alex Vallis celebrated his 50th year of being in the Rebels in Malta just a few months back.
Yeah.
But what's changed is really the way the bikie gangs have become so sophisticated. But one of the first things I looked at in this podcast was the 2009 airport murder at Sydney Airport. Harry, you were working that day, I believe.
Yeah, that I remember it well. I remember it very well. I was a detective inspector at Gang Squad for New South Wales Police at the time, and I happened to be on call on that weekend. And I had been out, I think there'd been 7 shootings across Sydney that night. So I hadn't slept. I'd been out responding to the different shootings. And there was concern that there was a bikie war erupting. And I do remember doing a media conference where the questions were put to me, is this the start of a bikie war? And I said, look, it's too early at this stage because it was, the shootings happened overnight. By the time I got home that afternoon, I got a call from a senior officer and said, "Have you heard what's happened at the airport?" And that's when the Comancheros and the Hells Angels ended up coming to blows at Sydney Airport.
It's crazy. I mean, obviously Anthony Zervis was a Hells Angels associate. He was killed. Now, Mick Howie was charged with that. I don't think he ended up being convicted of it, but he's now dead himself. Zervis's head was smashed with a 13-kilogram bollard. Now, I went to the airport recently and I noticed those bollards aren't there anymore.
They've been removed. I honestly think in the landscape of bikies, that was a turning point in the way that the police policed bikies. I was at the Gang Squad at the time and I know that on the back of that, the public had had enough. You can't have someone being bashed to death at the domestic terminal at Sydney Airport. So the response from the police at the time, and I'm sure this has been touched on in your podcast, Strike Force Raptor was formed, and they were specifically tasked with dismantling the bikie groups, and I think they've made a huge impact on bikies and the way bikies go about their business.
Yeah, I spoke with Stuart Smith, the Assistant Commissioner at New South Wales Police, and he was instrumental in setting up Strike Force Raptor. Now, he was saying that there was a really in-your-face method of policing. They went out and said, right, we're not having bikies in colours anymore, we're not having clubhouses, and they've really just targeted people and almost harassed the bikies.
Yeah, I think and harass people well, some people might say that's what should happen. But it was a different style of policing. The way that we policed bikies at that point in time changed. That it was going to be, I'd call it proactive. Went out there to disrupt the groups and the gangs and taking their colours off, dismantling clubhouses. It had an effect.
It is a really big change, but what's interesting is it's not every state in Australia has those laws. New South Wales has them, Queensland did a version of them, but in Victoria, you can still have your clubhouses and you can still go on runs in your club colours. It's very... Yeah. There's sort of 2 speeds when it comes to laws in Australia at the moment.
That's the thing, and I think the jurisdictions, and this is just my interpretation of it, that where the bikie laws are easier for gangs to operate, people will gravitate towards that. It makes sense.
Even Tarek Zahed moved down to Melbourne for a short time and was at the tennis, for goodness sake. He was there. He was at the Australian Open final, and Rafael Nadal had to hold his serve because he was late back to his seat. I mean,
I'm laughing because I remember that. Talk about keeping a low profile.
Keeping a low profile. He's got the best seats in the house. Yeah. And then a couple of months later now, Tarek is now in hospital at the moment, still recovering from being shot 10 times, where his brother was killed outside of gym in Sydney. So he decided to come back to New South Wales, even though there were threats to his life. I mean, it was in the front Telegraph, where there was about $1 million was placed on his head.
Well, part of the bikie lifestyle is a bit of bravado. It's a very macho world that people operate in, and they don't want to show fear, and part of it. And this is my understanding of bikies when I was working on bikies. They achieve what they want through intimidation. So part of the thing was, if a group of bikies turned up in colours, people were fearful of them for obvious reasons, and that was the way they operated, so, through that intimidation. So they're not inclined to go underground. They want to be out and seen. And I look at some of the shootings across Sydney, and I've been out of the police now, so I'm not working on them. So this is an observation from outside, but they're very public. It's not like someone's just been taken away and killed. Public shootings. That's not my understanding. I know that's making a statement. The bad guys are making a statement. Look, this is what we're going to do.
We don't care. What strikes me about the Tarek Zahed and Omar's shooting at that gym is that anyone could have been killed. I mean, there was 20 bullets fired. Yeah. And I remember that day I'd gone for a swim at the local pool, and there was a staff member on the front desk. And I thought, gee, why was there no one? Or how did the person on the front desk at the gym not get shot? And is it just luck? Or
I think when they look back at history, the changing face of bikies, it will be the fact that people would tolerate when they were committing crimes amongst themselves. And when I say tolerate, it was something that didn't impact on the average citizen. But when you get these shootings, these public place shootings, it's just through good luck, not good management, that innocent people aren't killed.
Yeah, it's frightening. And I mean, that was a handgun with an addition to a Glock, which actually turned it from a regular pistol into something that was firing 20 rounds in 20 seconds. And even the actual shooters, one of them almost shot each other. So they're not actually sort of quite sophisticated or well trained.
They're not. When you were talking about that, I'm just thinking the trained professionals. I know that if they had a firearm like that, they're difficult to handle. They can cause accidents. And when I say accidents, it's not really an accident. If you go out and you're intending to shoot someone and some innocent bystander gets shot, well, your actions have brought it on themselves.
What is interesting about it is part of the podcast talked to Assistant Commissioner Stuart Smith, and he said that a lot of the bikies violence now is being outsourced. There's these young gangs who are willing to actually take on hits, in his words, for very little money. Are you sort of concerned that it's not? It could be just young kids who are just out of high school.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. It's something that, and I'll defer to what the police who are working on the cases are saying about it now. But it is a worry that if young kids that could go either way in their life are gravitating towards becoming involved in bikie gangs, because it's been said to me and said a lot that with members, and I do speak to a lot of bikies, or I have over the years, that when you join a gang, the likelihood is you're going to end up dead or you're going to end up in jail. And certainly what we're seeing, it seems to play out. So the fact that kids are still, or when I say kids, young people are still willing to head towards membership, it's concerning.
But it's just the cash. What I was shocked at in the podcast is how much money is flowing through these bikie gangs. They've become so sophisticated. And I don't know if this is a reaction to the Strike Force Raptor and that sort of in-your-face policing, but they've become more organised, and they're dealing with international triads, the Asian triads, they're dealing with the mafia and other groups to actually bring lots of drugs into Australia. And they're making as much as $8 million a day out of drugs. And so it's just that cash is enticing people into it.
It's a lot of money, but when you think like gangs, they're outlaw motorcycle gangs. They're the 1%ers, so they're not there to earn an honest dollar. They're there to make money, and there's so much money in drugs, so it doesn't surprise me. That's where a lot of their money is coming from. But the impact that type of crime has. But so what you're saying, I suppose, in talking about what you've uncovered on the podcast is the changing face of bikies.
Yeah, they've become, it's Bikies Inc. And I didn't realise this when I first wrote it, but I was meaning Bikies Inc. as in incorporated, INC, not INK like their tattoos.
Yeah.
And I only realised after I'd done it, I went, oh, hang on, that.
You've got to change the letter.
It made a bit of a pun by accident. Yeah. But it is just a really sophisticated group of, it's like a business.
Yeah.
And they're moving things around and moving cash around. And what's probably also disrupted them a bit is that Anom app, the Sting last year, where they were using an app which they thought was encrypted, but the police were actually listening to their messages. So there were quite a lot of commentators, particularly in South Australia, who are now either facing charges, and we've also had a couple of charges on some big players, and then Tarek Zahed's shooting. So it's a busy world, or it's a changing world for the bikers at the moment, but the drugs are still coming in. Even with the commentaries in disarray, there's still a lot of drugs coming into Australia.
Well, the money, like organised crime, there's a structure to it too. It's almost, I call it pyramid selling, which is probably not the right way of describing it, but the people at the top are the ones that are making the money, and you've got the foot soldiers taking the risk. So a lot of people can be caught at the lower level, and the top people are sitting there and enjoying the proceeds of crime.
And that's a point that Mike Jubelin makes. He's the head of the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission. We interviewed him for the podcast, and he said that it is the people at the top of the tree making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Yeah. But the ones down below, they're never getting towards that cash. They think they will, but it eludes them.
I've spoken over the years a lot of disgruntled members that they felt like they were doing the hard yards, or doing the work, the heavy lifting, and people above were getting the reward. But it sounds like you've really taken a deep dive into this. Has it changed your view on what the whole world was about with bikies?
It has a little bit, because you think of bikies as being uncoordinated or just as small time players, but I think what's surprised me is how sophisticated and how big they are now, and how entrenched the gangs are in organised crime, and they're not just distributing the drugs anymore; they're actually bringing it in as wholesalers. So I think there's going to be a lot more work for the police to do to try and dismantle these networks.
Well, I know with the conversations we've had before we sat down here, and from what you've learnt on your podcast, an investigation, is that it is a changing landscape, and hopefully it's things like the anonymous sting with which I thought that made me want to be a police officer again. I thought that was a brilliant strike for law enforcement, but to stay one step ahead of them. Are you confident in what you've seen that the police will be able to do that?
I think the police will always be able to disrupt bikie gangs and organised crime, but the issue is not the supply; it's the demand. People want to spend $400 on coke on a weekend, which I can't fathom why you'd be willing to spend that much money on drugs.
But that's what they do.
That's what they do. And then that's before you even talk about ICE. We were at court recently waiting for an international drug lord to come back and be extradited to Australia. And this legal aid lawyer was talking about how ICE, you have relatively, quote unquote, normal or stable people can end up in court within a matter of weeks just for taking ICE.
Towards the tail end of my policing career, which is only going back a couple of years ago, I was seeing the impact of ICE had on people, and it was devastating. And if that it already is out in the community, but that's something that's really got to be jumped on, because it has a terrible impact.
Yeah.
But so I'm fascinated by what you've learnt from the podcast. But to me, the message that you're putting across is that we mightn't see them riding down their bikes with their patched up and colours on a run, but they're still very much out there.
Yeah, that's right. They some of them don't even ride motorcycles anymore, but they're actually they're impacting on people's lives without anyone realising.
Well, I'm going to be listening to the podcast. It is a world that interests me, and having seen it from the law enforcement side, and I'm interested in where it's going to head. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Gary.
If you want to hear more, check out bikiesinc.com.au. That's bikiesinc.com.au for the full podcast and all the episodes.